I'm delighted to say it's journalist and broadcaster Andrew Neil. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you.
Always great to get your analysis.
Here in person.
Here in person. Well, yeah, now you are actually on a sister station, obviously, and you were presenting a budget show yesterday, as I was, and I'm sure you were enjoying the fun and games as much as I was, when even before the Prime Minister was answering questions at PMQs, we got pretty much the whole budget delivered to us by someone accidentally pressing send on an email from the Office for Budget Responsibilities. Now, you've covered a lot of budgets, you've covered a lot of elections, you've been, with all due respect, around a long time. What did you make of just that aspect of the budget?
It was unique, it never happened before. I mean, I've covered almost every budget since...
time immemorial.
The Geoffrey Howe. Actually, before that even. I used to do Dennis Healy's budgets on the BBC Newsnight. Remember Newsnight?
That was used to be a thing.
It was in the days when people actually watched the BBC, and we had 12 million people. It's unprecedented, but you know, it was kind of par for the course because we already knew what was in the budget to an unprecedented level. We've never had this much intentional leaking before, and lo and behold, the OBR, the Blue Book as they call it, drops, and in that Blue Book, because their forecasts are based on what's in the budget, it told us what was in the budget. So we knew there was going to be a mansion tax. Personal allowances were going to be frozen yet again. This time for another 3 years. There was going to be electrical vehicle tax. We knew she was going to borrow more, tax more, spend more. So it basically told us everything. It
was an extraordinary scene, and of course we got this apology from the OBR. What we really want, though, is an apology from the Chancellor, who made a very big deal about, in her speech and in interviews today, about how these were her choices. Were they the right choices that she made yesterday?
Well, I'm not sure they were all her choices, actually. I think they were Keir Starmer's 10 Downing Street played a bigger role in this than in the previous budget, because I think Starmer worked out that his future depends on this coming right just as much as the Chancellor's.
It was a budget for jobs, but the jobs involved were Keir Starmer's and Rachel
These
Reeves.
are the two ones that mattered most of all. Hence, it was a budget basically geared to the soft left. Which dominates the Parliamentary Labour Party now. Hence the reason it was essentially an old-style Labour tax and spend budget. It was back to the 1970s.
The trouble with this, there was a manifesto pledge back in 2024, and the Tories put out a video, which, I mean, just, you know, time after time after time, that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer and other cabinet ministers said they were not going to be raising taxes on working people. Now, this morning, Rachel Reeves came, well, you know, there was another clause after that, not raising the rates of any of the income tax rates or national insurance.
But that's
not
what she said on camera.
It's not what she said repeatedly, but also there was a promise last year that she wouldn't come back for more. So we've had two breaches. How significant is that breach, other than the fact that, look, we're all cynical hacks, we don't trust anything any politicians say, but if voters can't trust anything that is written in black and white in a manifesto, is told to our faces by a would-be Prime Minister, by a would-be Chancellor, how dangerous is that?
It's hugely significant because it means that Britain has a government which it didn't vote for. Britain voted for a moderate centre-left Labour Party, which said it was not going to increase taxes, other than a few bespoke ones, VAT on school fees, taxing the non-doms, a couple of others, which between them would bring in about 10 billion. But there would be no overall increase in taxation, and she would run a very tight ship when it came to public spending. Well, instead, what we have is, if you take her budget last year and the budget this year, we've had the biggest increase in tax of any government since the 1970s. And we have public spending now up at 45% of GDP. Now, nobody voted for any of this at all. And that's why it is important, because it's almost the opposite of what Labour said it would do in power. Now, some of us pointed out at the time that it was unlikely to stick to these manifesto promises, but even so, that's what they said.
They stuck to it. Well, Keir Starmer,
and I think it's bad for democracy, because these are fundamental changes. I mean, let me just try and explain. You know, budgets come and budgets go. This is a watershed budget. This is a budget which bakes in all the tax increases and all the extra public spending of the pandemic, and then adds more. Adds more tax, more spending, and something totally undercovered in the press today, even more borrowing. A ton more borrowing on top of what she planned to do when she added a ton more borrowing in October of last year. And so Britain is now a different country. Britain is now, ironically, having voted for Brexit, when it comes to the scale of taxation, the highest tax burden in our history, and the level of public spending, 45% of GDP, that makes us a European economy.
Yeah.
That makes us.
How's that working for them?
It's going very well. They've had at least 0.5%.
Hold on a minute, Andrew Neil. Is that all Brexit's fault?
Yeah, well,
That's what we keep being told.
The ironic thing is that as Britain voted for Brexit in 2016, we have never been more like Europe. And what this does is it bakes in Britain now as a European-style social democracy.
But the contrast to that is that, and Henry Hill, you and I are discussing this morning, is you've got this issue where you've got we're paying sky-high taxes like a lot of other European countries, but as Henry was pointing out, unlike a lot of those Scandinavian countries which do have these sky-high taxes, we don't have public services to match. So there is a general acceptance in a lot of those countries. You pay a lot of money, but you get good public services and lots of benefits back. But we don't get.
And that's true. By and large, public services in social democratic Europe are of a better quality. The health service in France is far superior to the NHS. As I split my time between the UK and France, I make sure if I'm going to get ill, I get ill in France, and not here. So there's no question about that. But that's our own fault. And we're the ones that create these public services. We're the ones that run them. And by the way, it's not going to get any better, because this government will not do the changes necessary in the public service. Let me just give you one figure. Productivity in the NHS is now 20% lower than it was before the pandemic. If you simply
huge extra sums of money, huge number of more staff.
If you simply returned the NHS to the productivity level of 2019, you could cut taxes.
Yeah,
it'd be worth another £50 billion to the NHS, and they're never going to change that because they're in thrall to the public sector unions that basically control productivity in the public sector. And they're not going to change that. They're running scared of the soft left. They ain't going to take on the public sector unions.
And it's very interesting. And again, you come to the two-child benefit cap. That was something that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were arguing against. They took the whip away from some rebels who voted for it earlier this year. Keir Starmer's made a statement in the last 10 minutes or so.
Okay,
yes. He said the budget was fair and necessary. And he said, in response to accusations that Labour has broken Labour manifesto pledges, he said, we kept our manifesto in terms of what we promised. I accept the challenge we have asked everyone to contribute. That is because we need to protect our NHS, that phrase again, and to make sure we have money to put into our schools. But it's interesting, there wasn't anything about extra money for the NHS. It was money for benefits.
Yeah, and by the way, since Labour came in, we poured billions more into the NHS on top of the billions that the Tories poured in during the pandemic and kept after the pandemic was over. And the consequence of that is the waiting list, which was 7.6 million in July of last year, are now 7.4 million. So in almost 18 months, they've come down by only 200,000, despite extra billions going in. There is going to be no proper reform of the public service.
Yeah.
AI is going to take over the private sector, and the public sector is going to become an antediluvian museum while the private sector.
But to be fair, someone's got to order the fax machines in the pages.
Oh, well, I like
someone's got to keep them in business.
In fact, someone just asked me to send a fax, and I had to look up my dictionary. Find out what does that mean?
I tried to explain that to my teenager a few weeks ago.
Can I zoom past the British Museum before I catch a flight?
But look, this is something, and I know you've talked about this an awful lot as well in the past. I mean, we are looking at particularly, this idea that, if you work hard and you do the right thing and you go to work every day, alarm clock Britain, the strivers, the workers, that life is going to get better for you. But since 2008, we have seen no increase whatsoever after inflation in people's standard of living since 2008 for the average worker. That is very, very telling. However, we did see yesterday, benefits going up by inflation, minimum wage, things people going up by way above inflation, pensions going up by, thanks to the triple lock, above inflation, student loans. They're not having that. But crucially, and the biggest tax take that we saw yesterday was, of course, the freezing of the thresholds at which you start paying basic rate tax at 20%, and which you move to the higher rate tax at 40%, and to the top rate at 45%. We've now got an extraordinary that 1 in 4 people now are higher or above rate taxpayers.
Yeah, for
7% some years ago.
Well, for a tax rate, when Nigel Lawson, one of the budgets I covered, when Nigel Lawson introduced the 40% tax rate, he made it clear it was for people who earn big bucks.
It was the super rich.
And you could have no deductions. I mean, in the old days, you paid a marginal rate of 83%, but you could deduct everything. lunches in the city. Mortgage.
Oh, the good old
you
days.
could deduct your mortgage from it as well.
What?
Buy a yacht. You could, of course, you could.
Yeah.
First mortgage,
Tax, yes,
first
you're right,
mortgage
yeah.
I got, I could deduct all the interest on it. So it made it possible to do that. So 40% no deductions. If you earn more than a certain amount, 40% of your income goes to the extra, goes to the Treasury. That was for people on the big bucks. And I think what we've seen now is a real unfairness, because if that when Rishi Sunak froze the threshold at 12,250 or thereabouts, so that was your tax-free personal allowance. If that had continued to be indexed against inflation, what would it be worth today? 15,500. You can make 15,500 pounds before you paid tax.
As opposed to 12 and a half grand.
Right. Assuming inflation continued the way the OBR says, by 2030 it will be worth 17,300 pounds. A real boost to people on low incomes not having to pay tax. But instead, what we have after yesterday is that people who get up, work hard, often for not big salaries, do their best, their thresholds are frozen, they're paying more in real terms, but if you're on benefits, they're all index linked. And I think that fact will come back to haunt
Well,
the
this
government.
is it, because the Labour benchers were cheering this on. They were very, very keen
Well,
on
it's
this.
the
And there's no
welfare
doubt,
party.
and there's
It
no
is the
doubt at all
welfare party.
that's who Rachel Reeves was trying to please yesterday. But Labour voters, like every other voter, on average, don't support it. Now, the Labour voters are the least supportive of keeping the cap, but nevertheless, more than half of Labour voters wanted to keep that cap. And my guess is because they live near people and they know people who are in this situation. They've got a load of kids they can't afford, they're not working full time or if at all, and they're wondering why the heck they're expected to pay more taxes to pay for them. Is the Chancellor, our Labour MPs, are they just massively out of touch, or were they doing this, as many suspect, because the largest number of families, or the communities in this country who do have 4, 5, 6 plus kids and would benefit the most from this axing of the cap are families of ethnic minorities, particularly Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Black African and also Afro-Caribbean, and they tend to live in largely Labour voting constituencies. Was this just literally a bung to their own voters?
That may have been the consequence of it, but I think it's also they believe in this. They believe in an expanding welfare state. The purpose of government is to redistribute in favour of welfare. That is their modus operandi. And that is why, to save their own skins, Mr Starmer and Ms Reeves kowtowed to the backbench. This is now a government walking a tightrope between the soft left on the Labour backbenches and the gilt markets, keeping a wary eye on how much are they going to borrow.
They seem to be not particularly bothered.
It takes a while.
So far.
It takes a while. Unless you're as stupidly reckless as Liz Truss, it takes a while to sink in. But they're working out now, all these tax rises are backloaded, and that's only what makes the figures eventually come right, because they're borrowing a ton more. In last year, this year, and next year, she will borrow 50 billion more than she even planned to do in March of this year.
It's just mind-blowing, the numbers.
And when they work out that it's backloaded, and here's the other politically stupid thing, which won't happen. All these big tax rises, including the biggest, the personal allowance frozen again for 3 years, they click in a year before the election.
Yeah.
Do you think Labour's going to proceed with all these tax rises a year before? I mean, there'll be political suicide. Now, there may be an election beforehand. I suspect Mr Starmer and Ms Reeves will be long gone by then anyway, but it doesn't pass the smell test on this.
What do you think they're going to do then?
Labour? They will draw breath, think the budget's been a success. Starmer and Reeves live to fight another day. And then bit by bit, because what we know now is that smorgasbord is actually a Swedish word for omnishambles. Bit by bit, it will unravel. And the revenues they say they'll get will turn out not to be. The gilt markets will notice that and say, hey, hold on, what's happening here? And looming up in May next year are elections which Labour will lose in England, Scotland, and Wales. And that is when the balloon goes up.
Yeah. So this is really all about, they hope, short-term political gain, or
to see them through.
or just
it was a budget for survival.
budget for survival, but the rest of us are left picking up the bill.
To survive.
Yes, but things are. I mean, things aren't good. Just want to ask you about two other taxes that sort of really struck me. One was about the paying per mile tax on electric vehicles. I've got to be honest, I did chuckle a bit about that on the basis that I've been saying for years, like when you get your free parking, your free congestion charge, and you're not paying fuel duty, you buy your electric vehicle. As soon as more people have got electric vehicles, there's going to be less fuel duty coming in. It's a crucial part of the budget. So, of course, they're going to put taxes up. But the mansion tax, now, it doesn't affect many people, probably affects some people we know, people, lucky 100,000 people who've got mansions or possibly even flats worth 2 million quid or more. That is being seen as well. It's a tax on the wealthy, but it's already being slated as a tax that may end up costing more to administer than it brings in.
Both the tax on EV and the so-called mansion tax are simply the product of a desperate scramble for revenues. When you rule out income tax increases, which are predictable, immediate and substantial, you're then left to scramble for a whole litany of smaller taxes, the smorgasbord.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. There's a huge case for reforming road tax, road tax, because in the long run, the tax on fuel isn't going to hack it. Yeah. There's a huge case for reforming property taxes. Yep. Property taxes in Britain are ludicrous, based on 1991 prices.
Yeah. And Buckingham Palace pays the same council tax as someone in quite ordinary house.
In Britain are undertaxed. Yep. I mean, I've paid property taxes in 3 countries, Britain, France and America. My most expensive property was in London. It had the lowest property tax by far. Yeah. But that's different from just scrabbling and saying, oh, I got another 100 million there, 100 million there. And this, in the end, was what was totally bereft in this budget. In a scramble for tax and spend, there were no reforms, no supply side reform, no efforts to make Britain more efficient, to function better, to attract inward investment, to get British business to invest more, to lubricate the labour market to get unemployment down.
To grow the economy,
the economy, as they once said. And the interesting thing is, I've just been looking at the figures, that we all know, Keir Starmer, I'm growth, that's all I'm in. Well, the OBR in the final Tory budget said by 2029 the economy would be 9% bigger than it was in March 24. Mm-hmm. The sums done yesterday, it'll only be 7% bigger. Ouch. In other words, even growth.
Both are dire, but it's even worse.
He said 9% sounds right home about.
Happy Thursday, everybody.
In the end, what this budget truly exposes is a government caught between political survival and economic reality. Taxes are rising, thresholds are frozen, public services remain inefficient, and borrowing continues to climb. While working people feel the pressure more each year, benefits and state spending expand with little promise of real reform. Britain now finds itself drifting toward a European-style social democracy without gaining the strong services such systems are meant to deliver. This wasn't the budget people voted for, and it wasn't the change they were promised. It raises a much bigger question about trust, fairness, and the direction of the country. As pressure builds and the political landscape shifts, one thing is clear: the decisions made today will shape Britain for years to come. But the real question is, how long will the public accept paying more while getting less? If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss our next political update.